to Deep Sleep Stories. If these stories have helped you through restless nights, please leave a review. Reviews are what help this podcast grow, reach more listeners, and stay alive. Without them, even something meaningful can slowly disappear. So if this show has brought you comfort, that small act truly helps keep it going. Now, settle in, and let's begin.
Welcome to Deep Sleep Stories, where your only task is to rest, and where a gentle tale can carry you softly towards sleep. Tonight, you'll drift into a quiet coastal night and meet a faithful lighthouse dog who keeps watch beside the sea. Settle in as comfortably as you can, letting your body become heavy in the place that's holding you. Notice the feeling of the air around your skin, the way your clothes or blankets rest against you, the steady support beneath your shoulders and hips. If it feels good, allow your jaw to loosen, your tongue to rest, your forehead to smooth. Take a slow breath in and let it go with a long, easy sigh. Again, a calm inhale and a gentle exhale, as if you're breathing out the entire day. With each breath, you can imagine the noise of your thoughts turning down like a lamp being dimmed, not switched off, just softened, made warm, made small enough that it can't keep you awake. Now in your mind, picture a coast at night, a quiet shoreline with dark velvet water and a faint silver sheen where moonlight touches the waves. The air tastes clean and cool, touched with salt. Somewhere a lighthouse stands in patient stillness, its lamp sweeping the sea in a slow, unhurried rhythm. And near its door, a dog waits as if he has all the time in the world. Let your breathing find the same rhythm as that turning light. In and out. And as you relax more deeply, the story can begin to tell itself, and you can simply listen, drifting further and further into calm. On a far edge of the coast where the land narrowed into a rocky finger and the sea stretched wide in every direction, the lighthouse kept its steady watch. The tower was pale stone, softened by years of wind and weather, and it rose from the cliff like something grown there, natural, familiar, belonging. Around it, the world was simple, a low keeper's cottage tucked close to the tower for warmth and shelter, a small patch of grass that never stayed perfectly neat because the ocean air loved to comb it this way and that, a path of worn boards and rounded stones, polished by countless footsteps and stormy nights. And everywhere, the sound of water moving, waves folding onto waves, tide speaking to shore, the gentle hush and shiver of foam. The lighthouse light did not hurry. It moved as if it understood the long patience of the sea. A soft beam swept out across the darkness, brushed the black water until it turned briefly pearly, and then glided on. When it returned again. It always came back. That was the promise of it. And in the shadow near the cottage door, curled in a neat circle on an old mat that smelled faintly of sun-warmed rope, slept the lighthouse dog. His name was Milo. Milo was not large, but he was sturdy in the way of dogs who lived with weather. His coat was thick and slightly wavy, the color of sand after rain, deepened here and there with charcoal flecks, as if the night had kissed him. His ears folded softly, and when he slept, the tips of them twitched from time to time, catching distant sounds. His paws were broad, padded, accustomed to stone, to wood, to slippery seaweed, to the gentle sting of salt. He belonged to the lighthouse the way the lighthouse belonged to the coast. Not as a possession exactly, but as a companion, a presence, a steady heart. The keeper, a quiet person named Elowen, had found Milo years ago during a fog that rolled in so thick it seemed to press against the skin. She had been bringing in a basket of kindling when she heard a sound like a sigh from the edge of the path. Not a whimper, not a bark, just the faintest breath of worry. There, half hidden among tall grasses bent low by wind, was a dog with bright, thoughtful eyes. He looked thin then, all angles and hunger, but his gaze was calm. He did not flinch. He simply watched her, as if deciding whether the world was kind. Elowen had crouched down slowly, as if greeting a shy bird. She had offered a piece of bread, then a bit of cheese. Milo had come close enough to sniff the air, close enough to let her see the salt crusted along his whiskers, the tiny scratches on his paws, and when he finally took the food, he did it with a kind of quiet dignity, as if accepting an invitation rather than begging for rescue. That night, the fog pressed around the tower like a soft, damp blanket. Inside the cottage, Elowen had warmed a bowl of broth and set it down near the hearth. Milo had eaten, and then, as if he had always lived there, he lay beside the fire and sighed into sleep. In the morning, when the fog lifted, he was still there, and after that, he stayed. Now, on a night when the sky was clear enough for stars to glitter like scattered frost, Milo shifted in his sleep and opened his eyes. The lighthouse was awake. The tower hummed with its own quiet life, the slow turning of the lamp mechanism, the faint tick of metal, the gentle vibration of something working faithfully. Outside, the wind moved in soft passes, neither harsh nor playful, simply present. Milo rose and stretched, one paw reaching forward, his back arching into a long curve. He yawned, mouth wide, tongue curling, and then shook himself lightly, as if rearranging the night along his fur. He padded to the cottage door. Elowen had left it slightly open, as she often did when the weather was gentle, trusting the lighthouse and its dog to guard the threshold. Milo stepped out onto the small porch and sat down, his tail tucked neatly beside him. From there he could see the sea. It was darker farther out, but near the cliffs it held a faint glow, the moon painting thin lines on the surface. The waves rose and fell with a soothing steadiness. Each one arrived with a soft hush, broke into foam, and slid back as if bowing. Milo watched the water as if listening. He always listened. There were nights when the sea was loud with wildness, the wind roaring like a crowd, spray flying up into the air, and the lighthouse light cutting through chaos with calm certainty. On those nights, Milo stayed close to Elowen, following her from window to window, sitting at her feet as she checked instruments and watched for any sign of trouble. But tonight the sea was peaceful, and still Milo's ears tilted forward, attentive. A gull cried out somewhere in the darkness, a single note that echoed faintly and then dissolved. Far below, in a sheltered cleft of rock, water made a slow gurgling sound as it moved through a narrow passage. Milo's nose lifted. The air carried salt and seaweed and the subtle mineral scent of stone. Underneath it all was something else, something delicate, like smoke from a distant chimney or the faint perfume of wet wood. He turned his head slightly and stared toward a part of the shoreline where the cliffs bent inward, forming a small cove. The lighthouse light swept across that area, and for a brief moment the cove brightened. The water there seemed smoother, as if it were cradled by the land. And on the edge of that sheltered water, where a strip of pale sand met dark rock, something lay in a way that did not match the shapes around it. A piece of driftwood, perhaps, or something more. Milo stood. His paws made barely a sound as he moved down the porch steps and onto the path. The stones were cool underfoot. He walked with easy confidence, following the familiar route along the cliffside, staying well away from the edge, where the drop fell sharply to the sea. As he went, the lighthouse beam swung behind him, bathing the path in soft light, and then letting it return to starlit shadow. The rhythm of that light was like breathing. Bright, dim, bright, dim. An old, comforting pattern. When Milo reached a point where the path dipped toward the cove, he paused. He sniffed again. The scent of wet wood was stronger now, and there was a hint of something human. Cloth, perhaps, and the faint tang of metal. He moved down the slope. The cove was quiet, protected from the wind. The waves here were gentle, curling in like a lullaby. The sand was damp and firm, holding the print of each paw as Milo approached the dark shape near the waterline. It was not driftwood. It was a small boat. Not much bigger than a rowboat, more like a fisherman's skiff, its paint worn and faded. It had been pulled half onto the sand by the tide, and it rested there as if exhausted. Milo stepped closer. A rope trailed from the bow, snaking across the sand and disappearing into the shallow water. The boat creaked faintly as another small wave lifted and settled it. And then Milo saw the figure. A person lay inside the boat, wrapped in a cloak or heavy blanket, their face turned away, hair damp and dark. They were very still, but Milo could hear something important, the soft sound of breathing. He let out a low, gentle huff, not a bark, not a warning, more like a quiet announcement that someone was here. Then he turned and ran. His paws moved quickly over sand, then up the slope, then onto the path. He ran with purpose, but not panic. He knew exactly what to do. The lighthouse had taught him steadiness. He reached the cottage and pushed through the half-open door. Inside, the air was warmer, scented with tea leaves and wood smoke. A small lamp glowed on the table, and Elowen sat in a chair with a blanket over her knees, reading by the light. She looked up the moment Milo entered. That was the way of their life together. She understood his sounds and movements like another language. "Milo," she murmured, setting the book aside. Her voice was soft. Sleep warmed. "What is it?" Milo trotted closer, then turned toward the door, then back again. His tail did not wag wildly. It moved once, slow and deliberate. Elowen rose, pulling on her boots. She took a lantern from its hook and opened it, letting the flame brighten. "All right," she whispered, as if speaking to the night itself. "Show me." Milo led her along the path, the lantern swinging gently in her hand. Its light painted warm circles on stone and grass. Above them, the lighthouse beam continued its calm sweep, a silent companion. When they reached the cove, Elowen's steps slowed. She saw the boat, the figure inside, and she drew in a careful breath. Milo stood close to her leg. His body was still. His ears were forward. He was watchful but not afraid. Elowen walked down onto the sand and knelt beside the boat. She lifted the edge of the damp blanket and revealed a face pale with cold, eyes closed, lashes clumped slightly from seawater. The person's lips were tinged blue, but they were breathing. Elowen touched their wrist, found a pulse, and let out a long exhale of relief. She looked at Milo, and in her gaze was gratitude so quiet it felt like another kind of warmth. "Good dog," she whispered, and Milo leaned into her hand for a moment, accepting the praise as gently as he had accepted food on that foggy night long ago. Together, they did what needed to be done, without rush, without drama, only care. Elowen loosened the rope and secured the boat more firmly on the sand. She adjusted the blanket around the stranger, tucking it closer to their chin. Then she and Milo guided the person slowly, carefully, up the slope to the cottage. Inside, Elowen laid the stranger near the hearth, where the fire's breath could warm them. Milo lay nearby, his head on his paws, his eyes open in a soft, steady watch. The stranger stirred as warmth reached them, making a small sound that might have been a sigh or a word half formed. Elowen offered water, then warm tea. She did not ask questions right away. In a place like the lighthouse, the first rule was always comfort. As the night deepened, the stranger's color returned. Their hands stopped trembling. Their breathing grew even. Milo's eyes softened. Outside, the sea continued its steady song, and the lighthouse light moved across it like a slow blessing. When dawn finally approached, it arrived quietly, as if not wanting to disturb the stillness. The sky faded from black to deep blue, then to a gentle gray. The stars disappeared, one by one, like candles being pinched out. Elowen stepped outside with a mug of tea in her hands. Milo followed, trotting at her side. The air was crisp, and the horizon held the faintest hint of pink. The sea looked calmer in the early light, its surface textured like brushed silk. They stood together on the porch. Milo sat, tail curled around his paws. Elowen sipped her tea and breathed in the morning. From inside, a soft movement. The stranger appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a spare blanket, hair still damp, but eyes open and clear now. They looked at the lighthouse, at the cliff, at the sea, and then down at Milo. Their gaze softened in a way that needed no explanation. I thought, the stranger began, voice rough. Then they swallowed and tried again. I thought I was gone. Elowen's expression was kind, and her voice carried the calm of someone who had spent many nights listening to waves. The tide brings many things, she said. Sometimes it brings help too. The stranger looked at Milo again. Milo held their gaze, steady and quiet. Was it him? The stranger asked. Alowen nodded. He heard you? Milo blinked slowly, as if the conversation had nothing to do with pride and everything to do with simple truth. The stranger's shoulders sagged, relief turning to something like wonder. They crouched carefully, mindful, and held out a hand. Milo stepped forward and placed his nose against their fingers, sniffing gently. The stranger's hand trembled slightly, but Milo's presence seemed to steady it. After a moment, Milo allowed their fingers to slide into the fur along his neck. The stranger's eyes closed briefly, and when they opened, they were shining. On that coast, life went on in its quiet way. The stranger stayed for a time, long enough to dry out, to rest, to regain strength. Their boat was repaired with patient hands and simple tools. Alowen never asked for a dramatic story. She listened when the stranger spoke, and she offered silence when they didn't. Milo accepted the stranger as he accepted the lighthouse itself, without fuss, without suspicion, only with a calm attention. He followed them sometimes when they walked the perimeter of the cliff, showing them where the ground was safest, where the rocks were slick with spray, where seabirds nested in hidden ledges. The stranger learned the rhythm of the place. They learned how the lighthouse light made the sea look like a living sheet of ink. They learned the smell of storm before the clouds even gathered. They learned that the wind could be a gentle hand or a wild voice, depending on the day. And they learned too that Milo was more than a dog who lived beside a lighthouse. He was a dog who belonged to the in-between places, the place between land and sea, between night and morning, between lost and found. Sometimes at dusk, when the sky held that deep, bruised purple and the first stars began to show, Milo would walk down to the rocks near the water's edge and stand there as if listening to something far away. Alowen would watch from the cliff, her hands tucked into her coat. She would not call him back. She trusted him. The lighthouse had taught her to trust quiet instincts. The stranger watched too, feeling the hush of the moment, the way the world seemed to hold its breath. When Milo stood at the edge of the tide, and then, on certain nights when the air felt especially clear, when the moon hung low and full, something unusual would happen. The sea would glow. Not everywhere, not like daylight, but in soft, scattered patches, as if the water were holding tiny stars within it. A shimmer would trail behind each wave, and when the foam curled back, it left a faint sparkling trace that faded slowly. The stranger stared the first time it happened, mouth slightly open. Alawan smiled, as if greeting an old friend. "The sea has its own lanterns," she said. Milo, meanwhile, seemed perfectly at ease. He stepped onto a flat rock and looked out over the glowing water. His silhouette was steady against the shimmer. Then he lifted his head and gave a single, gentle bark. It was not loud. It was not sharp. It was a note placed into the night like a pebble dropped into a still pond. And in the distance, far out where the water was dark again, a small answering light appeared. A boat's lantern, a moving point, bobbing softly. The stranger leaned forward, heart stirring. "Is someone out there?" Elowen nodded. "Fishermen sometimes," she said. "Or travelers who misjudge the coast." The stranger watched as the distant light wavered, then steadied, then shifted direction to follow the safer route around the rocks. Milo remained still, watching, ears forward, body calm. The lighthouse beam swept across the water, passing over the small boat's lantern, surrounding it briefly with brightness, and then moving on. The stranger realized something then, slowly, like a warm understanding spreading through the chest. The lighthouse did its work in a predictable arc, faithful and constant. But Milo listened. He sensed the small uncertainties out there, the tiny mistakes that could become big ones. He could feel when the sea carried someone too close to danger, and with one gentle bark, one quiet presence at the edge of the tide, he could remind them they were seen, that they were not alone. As days passed, the stranger grew stronger. Their cheeks regained color, their eyes brightened, and at last, the time came for them to leave. The morning of their departure was calm. The sea was a muted blue and the wind was mild. The sun rose behind thin clouds, turning them pearly. Alowan helped carry supplies to the repaired boat: water, bread, a small bundle of dried herbs for tea. She moved without fuss, like someone who understood that care could be practical and still feel like kindness. Milo followed, weaving around their legs, sniffing the rope, inspecting the boat with quiet seriousness. The stranger knelt on the sand beside Milo and wrapped their arms around his neck in a careful, gentle embrace. Milo stood still, accepting it, his tail giving one slow sweep. "Thank you," the stranger whispered into his fur. Milo's ears flicked, and he pressed his nose softly against the stranger's shoulder. When the boat finally slipped into the water and the stranger climbed in, they looked back at the lighthouse, at Elowen standing on the sand, and at Milo beside her, a steady shape against the coast. The stranger raised a hand in farewell. Elowen lifted hers in return. Milo simply watched. The boat moved away, oars dipping, water shining briefly around them. The lighthouse beam was not needed in the brightening day, but the tower stood all the same, patient as ever. When the boat became a small speck and then disappeared beyond the curve of the coast, Milo turned and began to walk back up the path. Elowen followed, her boots making soft sounds against stone. Life returned to its quiet rhythm, as it always did. The days were filled with small, soothing routines. Elowen polished the brass fittings and checked the lens. She tended the fire and mended nets left by visiting fishermen. She brewed tea and listened to the weather. At night, the lighthouse light resumed its slow sweep, painting the sea with calm certainty. And Milo kept his watch. He slept in sun-warmed patches on the porch. He walked the cliff path with unhurried steps. He listened to the sea. Sometimes, on afternoons when the wind was warm and the sky was wide and clear, Milo would lie in the grass near the tower and watch butterflies drift over wildflowers. He would blink slowly, his breathing steady, his body relaxed. Other times when fog rolled in and wrapped the world in soft gray, Milo would move like a shadow along the path, his nose low, his ears alert. He did not fear the fog. It was part of his world. Its softened edges, quieted sounds, made the lighthouse light feel even more important. On fog nights, Elowen's lantern glowed in the cottage window, a small warm square against the mist. Inside, the kettle would sing softly. The hearth would crackle. Milo would lie near the door, a steady presence, as if guarding not just the home, but the very feeling of safety within it. And every now and then, when the fog was thickest and the sea was hidden, a faint sound would drift up from below. A bell, not the lighthouse bell, but a small bell, buoy out on the water, ringing gently as it rocked with the waves. The sound was thin and distant, yet somehow comforting, like a lullaby played on a faraway instrument. Milo would lift his head at that sound. His eyes would focus, looking through the fog as if he could see beyond it. Sometimes he would stand and walk toward the cliff's edge, not too close, always careful, and he would sit there, listening. Elowen would join him, wrapping a shawl tighter around her shoulders. Together they would listen to the bell buoy's soft music and to the hush of the unseen sea. On one such night when the fog was so thick the lighthouse beam looked like a pale ribbon dissolving into cotton, Milo did something he rarely did. He left the path and moved toward a narrow trail that wound down the cliff to a lower ledge. Elowen noticed immediately. She called his name softly, not as a command, but as a question. Milo paused and looked back at her. His eyes were calm. He made no sound. And he turned and continued down the trail. Elowen hesitated only a moment, then took her lantern and followed. Her steps were careful. The trail was slick with damp, and the fog made every rock seem closer and farther at once. Milo moved with sure-footed ease. He knew this trail. He knew every stone and root and turn. As they descended, the sound of the sea grew louder, not wild but present. Waves breathed against rock. Foam whispered and slid back. The bellbuoy rang, soft and patient. They reached the lower ledge, a shelf of stone not far above the water. Here the fog felt even thicker, the world reduced to lantern light and sea sound. Milo stopped near the edge and stared out. Alowan stood behind him, lantern held steady, its glow turning the mist golden close by. "What is it, Milo?" she murmured. At first there was nothing to see. Then a shape appeared. A long, narrow piece of wood drifting close to the rocks. It moved with the waves, rising and falling. And clinging to it, barely visible in the fog, was a small bundle of dark fur. A seal pup. It was young, exhausted, its big eyes wide with fear. It had been pushed too close to the rocks by the tide, separated from whatever safe place it had meant to be. Milo let out a low, soft sound, more like a hum than a bark. He stepped closer to the edge of the ledge, careful not to slip, and he lay down, his front paws stretched forward. The seal pup blinked at him. Milo did not lunge. He did not bark loudly. He simply stayed. A steady shape, a calm presence. Alowan crouched and watched, understanding unfolding in her mind. She spoke softly to the seal pup as much as to Milo. "It's all right," she whispered, voice gentle as the fog. "You're safe." The seal pup's breathing was quick and shallow. It clung to the driftwood, trembling. Milo remained still, his eyes soft. He blinked slowly, as if offering the seal pup the rhythm of calm. The waves moved the driftwood closer, then farther, then closer again. The bell buoy rang, and the sound seemed to wrap around the moment like a charm. Gradually, the seal pup's frantic energy eased. Its body stopped shaking so hard. Its eyes stayed wide, but they no longer looked quite so panicked. Alowan watched the tide. She waited for the moment when the driftwood would come close enough. She timed her movements with the sea as if dancing with it. When the driftwood drifted close, she reached out carefully with a long piece of cloth, something soft she'd brought in her pocket without even thinking, because the Lighthouse trained you to be prepared. She looped the cloth gently around the driftwood and pulled, slow and steady, letting the sea do half the work. The driftwood slid closer. The seal pup cried out softly, but Milo did not move. He stayed like an anchor. At last, the driftwood bumped against the rock. Alowan reached again, hands steady, and in one gentle motion, she lifted the seal pup onto the ledge. It was slick and cold, its fur heavy with water. It shivered. It made a small, plaintive sound. Alowan wrapped the cloth around it, holding it close enough to share warmth, but not so tight as to frighten it. The seal pup's heart beat fast against her hands. Milo inched closer slowly and lay down beside them, his body seeing the pup not as prey, not as intruder, but as something that needed the quiet of safety. For a while they stayed there. Alowan crouched with the seal pup wrapped in cloth, Milo beside her, fog all around, sea below, bell buoy ringing its thin lullaby. Then, as if the world had been waiting for the right moment, a darker shape appeared out in the fog. Another seal, larger, stronger. moving with purpose. The mother had found the sound, or the scent, or perhaps the subtle shift in the sea's pattern. She rose from the water near the ledge, her sleek head lifting, eyes searching. Elowen held very still. Milo held very still. The seal pup made a small sound, and the mother responded, a low, resonant call that seemed to vibrate through the fog itself. Elowen gently loosened her hold, allowing the pup to wriggle toward the edge. The mother surged closer, and in a smooth, natural movement, the pup slid back into the water and into safety. The mother lingered a moment, watching the two figures on the ledge. The human with the lantern and the dog with calm eyes. Then she slipped away into the fog, her body disappearing as silently as a shadow. Elowen let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She rested a hand on Milo's head. "You heard it," she murmured. "You heard the little one." Milo's ears flicked, his eyes half closed. He looked content, as if this was simply part of his work, noticing, listening, helping when he could. They climbed back up the trail together, lantern light bobbing, fog hugging the path. When they reached the cottage, Elowen closed the door gently behind them, sealing warmth inside. Milo shook the damp from his fur and then curled by the hearth, sighing deeply, the kind of sigh that meant everything was as it should be. Outside, the lighthouse beam continued its slow sweep, threading through fog, touching water, returning again and again, faithful, calm, unending. And Milo slept, his paws twitching once as if he were still running along the shore in a dream. Now, as the story's tide begins to soften and drift toward rest, imagine the lighthouse settling into deeper quiet. The sea remains steady and patient, breathing against the rocks in a rhythm older than thought. The known world becomes simple: warm light, cool air, gentle sound. Milo sleeps beside the hearth, his body relaxed, his chest rising and falling in slow waves. Elowen moves quietly through the cottage, putting away the lantern, closing a book, letting the day fold neatly into night. Outside, the turning lighthouse light continues its calm arc, and with each sweep, it reassures the sleeping coastline. Everything that needed doing has been done. Everything that can wait will wait. You can let your mind rest in that same understanding. Breathe in and out. If any thoughts drift through, let them pass like clouds over a moonlit sea, noticed and then gone. The lighthouse stands, the ocean breathes, the dog sleeps, and you can sleep too. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well.